For today's episode, I want to talk a bit about burnout because this is something that I cycle throughout my life and I've been asked a lot about. And I want to share my thoughts and experiences with it because I'm actually just coming out of a burnout phase at the moment. And anyone who follows me online might have probably noticed that. I've slowed down a lot with my content. I took a week pretty much off in a sense, depending on what platform you follow me on. I realized that there was a point I had come to where I just felt overwhelmed and I couldn't keep up the pace I had set for myself. And that's kind of what I want to talk about when it comes to burnout, because I think obviously burnout is going to be different for everyone. And I think we all deal with it to an extent. But this is all purely from my own experience and thoughts on the matter. Burnout for me is very much tied to rigidity. And the issue I seem to have is that I confuse structure with rigidity. I love structure. Structure is really helpful for me. I need structure throughout my life to be able to feel grounded, to know what I need to do on a daily basis, really. I like routine. Routine makes me feel very secure and comfortable enough to be able to then be flexible in the ways I need to be, right? I love having a routine. But sometimes I think I'll skew too far to one side where my structure, my routine starts to become very rigid. And I think that's tied to anxiety for me. I start to feel like, okay, if I'm not sticking to this specific structure or routine, like to the T, then I'm doing it wrong. Perfectionism will creep in for me. And I'm sure other people also struggle with this as well. I'm sure I'm not the only one who deals with this. But then I'll start being a perfectionist about it. And then I'll get really strict and really rigid with how I'm doing things, when I'm doing things. And obviously, having a structure that you adhere to consistently helps you grow in the ways you want to. It's helped me with my creative work immensely. So I'm not completely, disregarding the value of having structure and discipline. Those are very important. But for me, I find that if I do not allow space for flexibility as well as structure, I will fall into burnout. And that's what's happened to me this past month-ish, I want to say. And it always happens to me around wintertime, obviously, because, we're more tired, it's darker, it's colder, you just don't have as much energy. And I was trying to keep up the same level of consistency and energy that I had maybe in the summertime, where I have way more energy and just way more daylight hours to be able to do things. I was trying to keep that up this past month or so, and it led me to burnout because I was trying to be very strict and rigid with how I was doing things. And this is a lesson that I've had to learn over and over again, but now I can really understand it and see it for what it is. And now I'm practicing allowing myself to be more flexible. So for me, rigidity leads to burnout. And I have to be very mindful about how I start to perceive my structure and when it skews too far to rigidity. And maybe this is something that you struggle with as well. If you are being too rigid with your life, with your tasks, with your goals, you might end up burning yourself out, because as humans, we're not meant to be rigid. We're meant to be in flow. We're meant to be in flux. We're meant to change and be flexible. And it's not a failure to do that. And I think that's where I struggle with this a lot, and I'm sure other people do too. We see flexibility, we see change, we see flow, and not adhering to, a strict structure as a failure in a sense. And it's not a failure. It's actually the success that you're looking for, because the whole point of wanting to do anything in your life, right? Any goals you have that you're setting the structure for is so that you feel good in your life, right? You're creating a life, hopefully, that you want to feel good in, that you want to enjoy. And part of that enjoyment requires flow. Like that's what we all aim for, really, if you think about it. We're all looking for flow. That's what we want to experience. Anything that is worthwhile puts us into flow state. That's what feels so good, because it makes us feel very present. Flow roots us in the present. That's why time changes when we're in flow state. It doesn't feel like we're, in the rules and limits of time when we're in flow state, whether that's through creative work or being with someone that you really like being with. Time changes. It morphs. It doesn't feel like you're within the same rules of time when you're with somebody that you really like, or you're doing something that takes you out of your body, right? So that's what we're aiming for in life. We all want to be in flow, and yet we think that the way to get that is by being strict and rigid, because we think that if we allow flow to happen, it's a failure. We think that by sticking to a very strict and rigid structure and not allowing ourselves to fall into flow, we're doing the right thing, that's how we should be doing it. And if we are allowing ourselves to flow and be flexible, then we are failing. But that's completely opposite, right? Because what we're looking for is that flow and flexibility. That's what we all strive for in life, right? To enjoy things, to allow ourselves to exist within them, to not be worried and anxious all the time. Rigidity creates anxiety because, of course, you're going to have to be on edge all the time to be rigidly adhering to a certain structure. You can't do that, with flow and with ease and effortlessness. You have to be very anxious, very on edge to make sure that you are being perfect in how you stick to something. And that's where my burnout stems from. And it might be something that you deal with as well. So the key here is to recognize when your structure is leaning too much to rigidity because of perfectionism, because of the fear of failure, and then forcing yourself to incorporate flow and flexibility into that. That's something that I've had to do, and it helps immensely. I've noticed it now within my recent burnout journey that I've been on. I've had to force myself to allow flow. So as an example for me, I have let myself, instead of waking up at a certain time, getting to my desk, doing this, whatever, I've changed up my routine. So I've allowed myself to actually write from bed for a couple of days. And obviously, I'm fortunate enough to do that. Not everybody has the ability to do exactly what I'm able to do. But within your life, right, find a way to switch up that routine and create that feeling of flexibility and flow where you don't have to be right on schedule. You don't have to be exactly doing the same thing every single day. Do something a little different. Show yourself something a little bit different to show yourself and prove to yourself that it's okay if it's not perfect. It's that feeling, that overwhelming feeling of, if I don't do it this way, I'm going to be wrong or bad and I'm failing and I'm not going to get to what I want. That is exhausting. That's where it leads to burnout. That's why you feel the way you feel. You have to let yourself see that it's okay to be flexible and to flow and to do something different and to not be always on schedule. And obviously, yes, there are things, deadlines, things you have to follow, whatever, procedures, steps. I get that. The things that don't require that, though, the things that you've been creating for yourself just to make you feel productive or make you feel like this is how you're going to get to whatever end goal you want to get to, play around with it a little bit. Let yourself have a little bit of flexibility with it. Show yourself that it's okay if you miss a day or you don't do it this day, you can do it another day. It's okay. Like even for me, when it comes to working out, I am pretty good at having like a consistent workout schedule where I will do some cardio throughout the week, and I let myself not do that for a full week. And it made me feel very anxious because it's, I'm realizing, I'm falling out of my habit, my routine, my schedule. It's not good for me. I should be working. And as soon as like the shoulds come in, that's when I realized I've been a bit too rigid. I have been putting too much pressure on myself. The whole point of working out is, of course, yes, physical health, making sure you're good, but it's also to enjoy life, right? I'm not going to be doing things that force me to feel awful all the time just because I'm doing them. Part of it should be that there is some level of enjoyment. Of course, some of the things that are good for you are not always going to be fun, but if you can't find any enjoyment in it whatsoever at all, then what's the point ultimately? Truly, what's the point of forcing yourself to do it over and over again? Because even as something as simple as flossing, I use that example all the time because it's like maybe the most mundane thing that we do as people to take care of ourselves. Even flossing now, I somewhat enjoy it because I found my rhythm, my flow in it, the way I like to do it, what time of night I do it. Some people have a different routine and schedule to it. I found the one that works for me, so it's okay. And let's say you miss it for a night. That's okay too. It's just about allowing yourself to be okay with that stuff. Because if you don't allow yourself to do that, you will get burnt out. And what happens afterwards, at least for me, and I'm sure it happens to anyone else as well, is that you get so burnt out that you completely abandon everything altogether for a way longer period of time than you would have liked to. And then that sabotages you, right? That holds you back from getting to where you want to be because now you've derailed your progress because you're totally exhausted and overwhelmed and anxious and feeling like a failure, and all the self-limiting beliefs and narratives are coming up and they're preventing you from moving forward or taking action because you feel so bad about yourself. That's not helping you either. So for me, I've learned now it's kind of a process of emotional maintenance to allow that flexibility for myself, to see myself as not a failure just because I'm not doing it exactly the way I always do it, or I'm not always on schedule. It's okay. I took a week for myself to just do things a little bit off. I didn't make as many videos as I normally do. I wrote a bit more on Substack because I just felt more in flow with that. I didn't respond to any comments, even though I tried my best to stay on top of them. I just let myself do that. and I didn't punish myself for it. I didn't shame myself. It's fine. Like, I'll figure it out. I'll get back into the groove of it. The point is to rest, relax, and feel okay so that I have the energy to go back to it. But if I were to have pushed myself through that, I truly think that I would have been even more overwhelmed. I might have taken even longer to get back to what I wanted to. Even with this podcast, I took some time off because I was feeling burnt out. And, I put this pressure on myself that it has to be every week at a certain time. And I had started posting videos as well to accompany the podcast episode on YouTube. And that makes it harder for me to record this through the pockets of time that I have in my week. So it was making it really difficult to stick to the schedule. It felt more tedious than it did feel enjoyable or purposeful. So I'm like, what's the point of that? So for this episode, I don't have a video, and I don't know if I will again, because honestly, I'm trying to allow myself to accept certain things about who I am and what I want. And, I've never really wanted to be a YouTuber. That's not really my goal. My goal is I love sharing my thoughts and ideas, and a podcast is one method of it. And I like just talking and sharing my thoughts and rambling sometimes. That's what I want, right? It's not about me being someone who is presented a certain way on YouTube. And that's okay. Like, it's okay for me to not want to do that. Maybe I will at some point. Maybe I won't. I'm just trying to I let myself be as in flow and flexible as I can so that I can continue doing the work, right? The point is I don't want to abandon the podcast. And I was kind of feeling that way when I was putting the pressure on myself to also have a video with it, but that would mean I would have to do it on a specific day when I knew my schedule would align with being able to get dressed and ready for a video. It was getting to be too much. And my goal was, I just don't want to abandon the podcast. I love the podcast and people really value it. And that's the point for me. So I took away the structure and rigidity. Not even the structure, the rigidity around that, because there still is a structure, right? I still want to record one every week and put it out and, set a time aside to edit it and all that stuff. But the rigidity around how it's specifically supposed to look to adhere to some sort of, outcome that I just set for myself, I let myself relax and not do that and, rest and re-engage with the work I'm doing, because that's the point ultimately. And it's felt so much better. Like, the moment I removed that necessity of a video with my podcast, that was the moment that I was like, okay, perfect. I can start recording again because I can just do it whenever I have the opportunity to. And I felt reinvigorated. I felt ready to do it again. I felt fun, like the idea of it. And I started thinking about the ideas I want to talk about. So I do think that removing the rigidity is a great way to allow yourself to get back into flow and to spark your creativity and imagination again for your own life, whatever it might look like. Your work might not be creative. It might be something else, and that's okay. But the point is to not burn yourself out because you've set these really rigid barriers around how you're supposed to do something. Take away the rigidity. It's okay. You can be flexible. You can be imperfect. It doesn't have to be exactly the same all the time. As long as you're getting it done, it's like done is better than perfect. You're doing it. You might be at your bare minimum level this week, or it might be not at all, but that's okay because that's just 1 week of the year. Or you might take a month off because you think that's what you need so that you can then continue on for the rest of the year. That's okay too. It's about what works best for you so that you don't get burnt out and you don't abandon everything altogether. That's the key. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it gave you some insight into burnout, what it might look like for you, just based on my own experience, of course. I'm not a therapist. I'm not an expert on burnout. This is just what I've learned about myself, and it's helped a lot to see it this way and work around it in this way. So if you want to talk to me one-to-one about these things and explore these ideas a little bit more, I offer one-to-one calls on my website. I also have my Substack where I write a lot over there if you want to just read some of my work. And I also post videos on TikTok and Instagram, so you can follow me on there if you want a bit more of my content. Other than that, thank you for being here, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.